of Saudi Arabia, an area where bin Laden has recruited.
According to a source familiar with the bin Laden organization, men returning from Afghanistan who had trained with bin Laden arrived in Saudi Arabia in recent weeks and were talking about some kind of big operation that was imminent.
The FBI searched this apartment in San Diego, where in those final stages, Monday before the attack, 3 men left town in a hurry.
They had the truck right here, they was moving out. It didn't seem like you were leaving anywhere. I mean, I never seen nobody move at midnight.
The trail of another accused hijacker, Mohammed Atta, in the months before the attack, led from Hamburg, Germany, to Florida and a series of flight schools, rental car agencies, and apartments. Then back to Hamburg, a return to Florida, and a final trip to New England, where he boarded a Boston to Los Angeles flight that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center. U.S. intelligence sources tell CNN the entire terrorist operation required so many people and special skills that they believe several terrorist groups had to be involved. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led by this man, Ayman Zawahiri, a close bin Laden associate, is one of the groups getting close scrutiny by U.S. analysts. They were photographed together about 3 years ago in Afghanistan. A second man who has not been seen in more than 20 years is also being scrutinized. Imad Mughniya, who is suspected by U.S. officials of masterminding a string of terrorism attacks against Americans, including the 1983 suicide bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241, has had numerous contacts with bin Laden since 1994, including face-to-face contact in the Sudan at an Islamic conference. This, according to Western and Mideast intelligence sources. A founding member of Lebanese Hezbollah, Mughniya is believed living in Iran. U.S. officials remain convinced that bin Laden was behind Tuesday's attack, but believe the day's mega-terrorism marked the debut of a new, larger, and more dangerous organization, a group with many heads and many faces. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
A new day is breaking in New York, and more streets of Lower Manhattan will reopen in the coming hours at the site of the World Trade Center. Rescue operations still underway. Garrick Utley's been updating us from New York. Let's join him again now. Garrick.
Yes, Zane, it's interesting to hear this term rescue efforts operations. It's exactly what they are, of course, but the fact is, as you pointed out a moment ago, is that no one's being rescued. No survivors have been found in the last couple of days, and there's no assurance that they will be found, although hope is still there. On Friday, there's a lot of activity continued, as you can see there at the site. There are also some inspections and visits there. Some federal officials from the Federal Emergency Management Agency went to the site to tour, and of course what they've been seeing there, well dressed as you can see from top to bottom, and you can also see how it's gotten cooler there, in fact even chilly. What they are finding, of course, is what everybody else has been working with, not only this horrendous pile of rubble, but the result of 7 buildings destroyed totally or partly, not just the 2 towers, but 7 buildings totally or partly destroyed, several others damaged. 15 million square feet of office space has been destroyed. Also, we have some new film, or videotape, I should say, amateur videotape of the disaster scene there. This was taken at the end of the week, and you just look and it tells its own story. First along the waterfront there, along the dock area, and there you see some strollers. Obviously, mothers or parents were out with their tiny children. They grabbed the children because it was faster to run than to, with a child in the arms, than with the strollers there. This is sort of a small park near the World Trade Centers. And as we go along the walkway there, very often where yachts and other boats are tied up, we see some of the rescue workers taking a brief break. And right there you start to see the destruction and the rubble. And it's going to be there for a long time to come. A month or 2 at least, just to get the first stage of that clearing operation accomplished. But let's check in right now with Alessio Vinci, who is our correspondent on the scene, to get the latest as the Saturday morning breaks here in New York. Alessio.
Good morning, Garrick. Well, we are well into the 3rd day of this operation, or as you mentioned, rescue operation without anybody being rescued. Hundreds of rescue workers continue in their effort around the clock in trying to dig somebody out of that big pile of rubble. It seems to me that looking at these people working so hard, they must have only one goal in their mind, and that is to find somebody somewhere underneath that big pile of rubble alive. They are very determined. They know that the chances to find somebody alive are growing dim as the day and the time goes by, but they also know that there are a lot of mothers, husbands, and family members who have not lost hope and who are counting on them. They know that America is watching them, and indeed the whole world is watching them, and certainly as they continue in their digging operation, they certainly are focused very much in trying to find somebody alive underneath there. 4 days after the two towers collapsed and more other buildings around it, as you mentioned, there is still a tall white cloud of smoke coming out of the debris. The iron is still smoldering, firemen still trying to put out some of the small fires perhaps underneath, and the rescue workers know that there are still 4,700 people missing, and that they know that if they continue to dig, perhaps somebody will come out of there alive. This is what the rescue operations want as much as the family members. But despite the intense and relentless rescue operation, so far only 185 bodies have been recovered, the rest mostly body parts. The final number of victims, however, is expected to climb in the high thousands, perhaps several thousands, as much as 5,000, some people said. The deadliest terrorist attack that I think in history has happened. Rescue workers have been using a mix of heavy equipment like two large cranes to lift the large block of concrete, but at times also been using their hands in trying to remove slowly some of the debris, perhaps in fear of damaging a dead body. More than 13,000 tons of debris has so far been removed. They've been taken to Staten Island. There the FBI is sifting through it in search of clues, in search of any evidence, and perhaps they can give us more about who exactly those hijackers were. Back to you, Garrick.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Well, if this week has been traumatic for those living in the United States, particularly in New York City, it's been doubly so for one specific group. Those are Muslims in the United States. They're not a small group, spread across the entire nation, some native-born here in the United States, some who have immigrated from other lands. They, of course, fear that they will be held responsible, at least for in the eyes of many Americans, for what happened at the World Trade Center at the Pentagon. Held responsible not directly, of course, but perhaps through association. They see troubled times ahead. Richard Blystone visited a mosque in Brooklyn.
A community rich in immigrants, sharing the time-honored aim of making it in America. Still on good terms with their old cultures. Still strong in their faith, Islam. Atlantic Avenue, they proudly say, is the oldest Arab community in New York, and as stunned as anyone by Tuesday's carnage.
It's shocking, it's horrible, you feel very bad, you know.
What's different here is fear of taking the blame.
All Arab American and Muslims in this country that resides and live and make their living in this country are as good as American as anyone else that came from all over the world, and they love the American flag just like anyone else, and they have nothing to do against this country, and this is one of the reasons we are living in this country.
Nonetheless, Atlantic Avenue today is keeping a low profile, lest the rash of slurs and slights and insults get more serious. Ahmed Morsi is passing out a letter in Arabic from the New York District Attorney, telling Arabs and Muslims where to call if harassed or attacked, like his own mother on Tuesday.
She was spit at, go back to your country, die, this and all these different slurs and different, my mother. Islam is a religion of tolerance, says the Imam Abdul Rahman Tafa, a religion that forbids ignorant wars between nations. Muslims from 22 nations come to pray here. We all feel the pain of what happened, says the Imam, and he asks, please give blood, money, whatever you can to help victims of the disaster. But if the attackers were Muslims pursuing what they saw as a holy war, did Islam attack America? Jihad is for defense and defense only, he says, and anyone who preaches otherwise doesn't know Islam. The Quran says if a man murders another human being, it is as though he killed all humanity. This Friday service ends with special prayers for all those who were killed, including at least 50 Muslims. Richard Blystone, CNN, Brooklyn, New York.
What we're seeing there is the makings of a real test of understanding and tolerance here in the United States. Zane?
Garrick, how are New Yorkers trying to get back to normal?
Well, each one does it in his or her own way. During the week, people have gone to work, although it's been very hard to concentrate on the job, obviously. This weekend, they'll seek some diversions, but I don't think many people are ready yet to go to a comedy and have a good laugh in the film, in the cinema or in a theater. I suspect it's going to wait until Monday. The stock markets will be open, and probably you have to have a week after the original tragedy to start to get back to normal. But what is normal, after all? Particularly here in New York. We're used to a lot of shocks and hardships. The city's going to come back, and that means the people are coming back, but it's going to take time.
Garrick Utley, thanks. Jonathan.
Across the nation, Friday was a day of prayer and remembrance. People took time from their daily routine to pray for those who perished in the attacks. In the Capitol, President George W. Bush joined past presidents, members of Congress, and other officials at a midday prayer service at the National Cathedral. And as evening fell, candles began glittering across the country as thousands of people held candlelight vigils. Flickering lights brightened a small Pennsylvania courthouse near the crash site of hijacked Flight 93. Meanwhile, in the Northwest, in Seattle, hundreds memorialized the lives lost and affected by the attacks. Just a few of many such ceremonies across the United States.
And across the world, country after country took a moment to remember the horror of September 11th. In Iran, antipathy towards the United States was set aside at a Tehran soccer stadium. Players and more than 60,000 spectators stood still in respect for the dead and grief-stricken in the U.S. Throughout Britain, people showed their solidarity to the American people. At work, in shopping malls, and even in the British Parliament, the country paused for a moment of silence. And to America's north, bells tolled out at an Ottawa prayer service. The Canadian flag was lowered to half-staff.
The mood was also somber at NATO headquarters in Brussels. There, too, a day of mourning, but also a day of hard reflection. The alliance's position is clear. The attacks were an assault against all of its members, but some may not be willing to join the U.S. on the battlefield. Diana Muriel reports on that.
A time for respect and remembrance. The 19 ambassadors to NATO shoulder to shoulder, observing 3 minutes of silence at midday on Friday, along with millions of other Europeans. They stand in readiness following Wednesday's affirmation of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, the first time a commitment has been given to a collective defense against an attack on an alliance member. Quite what that commitment will involve is less clear. Some alliance members, like Britain, have promised strong support for any NATO effort. Even Norway, reported to be less enthusiastic, says its commitment is firm.
Our resources are more limited, of course, than the United States resources, but we will certainly put military resources at the disposal of any operation that the alliance would decide. There should be no doubt about that. Special forces or whatever we could bring to bear on the situation.
The British and the French could also provide elite troops to any operation if required. But support from others, like the Netherlands, appears more muted.
We will be with you, mentally, morally, and possibly also in concrete terms. But what it will be at that stage, I can't answer today.
Former NATO chief Willy Klaus believes some members of the NATO alliance would be unwilling to participate in direct military action, particularly if that involved attacks on countries that are shown to have harboured or supported the terrorists responsible for Tuesday's acts of terror.
It depends what countries and what could be the consequences of the military actions against those countries. Are we speaking about countries controlling nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, yes or no? It's a big difference, you know.
Until a terrorist target is identified, NATO allies are understood to be providing military intelligence to assist the United States in their investigation. As the 19 national flags of the NATO alliance fly at half-staff, the time for action could be approaching. The United States has yet to make specific demands for NATO assistance, but that is expected here in the coming days and weeks. Diana Muriel, CNN, at NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Ireland closed all its public offices, schools and businesses Friday in a national